What's up, YouTubers? My name is Finn, and my pronouns are he, him. Today, I want to talk about how to recognize signs of alcoholism and the kind of dysfunction that is wrapped up in living with an alcoholic. We're going to identify some of the feelings maybe that you experience when you come in contact with these things. And I'm not going to offer any quick solutions to living with them. We're just really going to talk about what makes this really difficult, what is special about living with someone with alcoholism, and hopefully we can all relate to a common set of challenges. Let's get into it. Hey friends, welcome back to Al-Anon Recovery Hacks, where we break down recovery into practical everyday tools. If you're ready for more serenity and less chaos, you're in the right place. Before we dive in, just a quick note, I'm not a spokesperson for Al-Anon or any other 12-step group. Everything I share here is based on my own personal experience, strength, and hope. Take what you like and leave the rest. So we'll just start with a caveat of I am not an expert. I am one person, and this is my experience and what I've taken away from my time in Al-Anon. Everybody has a different perspective, and there is no one clinical way to identify an alcoholic. For me, it is the behaviors of living with someone who is affected by alcoholism that makes my life unmanageable. And so when I'm confronted with a set of behaviors, it's time for me to get support and go to an Al-Anon meeting. So this isn't to say we want to identify an alcoholic so we can put them in a 12-step program or a rehab center. This is really an attempt for me to say, you're not alone. These are some classic things that you might be experiencing, and you're not crazy. So let's get into some of the classic things that I believe surround alcoholic drinking and tend to develop in relationships with alcoholics. So one of the basic signs of alcoholism is the drinking. More and more drink is needed over time, and the effects that alcohol brings to the person for relief are diminished over time, so they have to drink more and more. Another sign is denial or justification. So they might minimize the drinking or seem to think, I can stop anytime. I'm just taking the edge off, and they're defensive when they're confronted with some of the consequences of drinking, or maybe when you point out the escalating use, they're like, no, it's fine. Everybody drinks like this, or, defensiveness. Another sign is you might be experiencing some broken promises, like, I'll quit after the holidays, or, this is the last time, it won't happen again. So repeated apologies that aren't followed by any real change, that is a sign that they really can't control the drinking. And while they might totally mean what they're promising, it's just not possible for them to follow through. Isolation or, secretive behavior around the drinking, hiding alcohol, or avoiding situations where they think they can't get a drink. They might really just be hanging out with friends who are drinking buddies. They don't really have friends that they can count on in other situations. So looking at, are they pulling back from genuine relationships with other people so that they can hide the drinking or continue to drink alone? Another sign is financial or legal problems. They most likely, when they're getting into their disease, are missing work. They might be losing jobs. They might be spending money irresponsibly when they do have a job. There could be DUIs, arrests. You might just experience some reckless behavior. Maybe there's DHS involvement. So some of the problems, start to get pretty serious. And when law enforcement gets involved, that's when sometimes it can be pretty obvious to everybody what's going on. But for me personally, I've been in relationships with alcoholics that weren't drinking, and it was really, really difficult. There were still tons of things that I found problematic. And so I want to go through some of those other more subtle things that you might be struggling with. For me, one of the most tricky and confusing things is unpredictability and mood swings. So the person is being kind and loving one minute, and then they're angry or cold or distant the next minute. It is extremely hard to plan anything with them. You can't rely on them emotionally, and they're basically unavailable emotionally to you. And this can have to do with drinking, or like I said, it might not have anything to do with the drink. They might still be sober and having these horrible mood swings, especially if they're just getting sober. Another thing is they're blaming others. A lot of times when their disease is really advanced, they really can't take any responsibility for their actions and the consequences. So they're always playing the victim. They're blaming people at work. They're blaming family. They're blaming you. They're manipulating others to get their needs met. And that is really, really hard when you feel like you're always putting up guard because you're under attack. That there's no way that they could be at fault, and yet everything seems to always be a shitstorm. Another really tough one is gaslighting and sort of a double life. Maybe they're functioning really well, they look successful, they're good at hiding the problem. Maybe they insist that something really didn't happen. Maybe they don't remember anything because of the blackouts, but they don't admit anything is wrong and didn't happen, and you're left feeling like you're crazy. Another really tough one is when someone else is physically or emotionally abusive. So if these behaviors are getting severe enough, take a look at it. You might be experiencing forms of emotional or physical or sexual abuse, and that can look like threats or violence or intimidation. It can look like coercion. There's genuine boundary violations, unwanted contact. That could be they're calling and texting too much. They're verbally or physically harassing you. It could be sexual boundary violations. But these are all really things that could happen in any dysfunctional relationship, but they're pretty common, I would say, in alcoholic relationships. So I say all these things not because I want you to go around, pointing people out and saying, you're an alcoholic, but because, again, these behaviors leave us feeling anxious, exhausted, doubting our own sanity. We're walking on eggshells. We constantly are feeling like, am I responsible for this? Guilty. And we're trying to control or manage the situation because we can see everything's falling apart. And sometimes it's like we're a frog in a pot of water and it's just beginning to boil, and we just gradually are experiencing these things, and we're not realizing how bad things have become until suddenly maybe something comes along and it makes you doubt that and say, well, this isn't normal. How am I been tolerating this? So if you're hearing any of these things, you feel like, oh my God, yes, listen to your gut. If something doesn't feel right, it's probably not right. And maybe it's time to get help for yourself. It does not matter if the other person identifies with the term alcoholic. Don't try to pin it on them if they are doing half of these things on the list and it's hard for you to stay in the relationship with this person without putting up these huge walls. It's time to take a look at it. The normal rules of engagement really don't apply to people who are gaslighting, manipulating, who cannot take responsibility for their actions. So this is why we have supports like Al-Anon, or maybe a trained professional that can help us see, what's happening. Because if we're trying to do this alone, we are just going to lose our sanity, our serenity. It is too powerful and baffling to go it alone. So I hope that this made you feel like a little bit more seen and gave you something to think about. So I would encourage you to get to a meeting, listen to other people, because you're going to hear a lot of commonalities in Al-Anon about experiences. But everybody's a little different. If you have a parent who's an alcoholic or who drinks too much, it's going to look a little different than if you have a child. So, get as many perspectives as you can, but do try to reach out to someone else and get their perspective on what has helped cope with these behaviors. There's a ton of tools in Al-Anon to help you set boundaries, to do self-care, to talk things out, to not engaging in arguments with the alcoholic. Like there's a plethora of tools, and so I won't get into them in this episode, but I want you to know there's solutions to all these difficult problems, but it just starts with us. We don't get to change the other person. All right, stay tuned for the next episode, and I will see you soon. Thanks for being here. If today's hack helped, give it a thumbs up and share it with someone who might need it. Don't forget to subscribe for more tools for the journey. And remember, we can't change them, but we can change how we show up. See you next time.